Broncos country, welcome back to another video, and today the Denver Broncos have released their initial 53-man roster. Now, obviously things could change very quickly, so I want to get this video out as soon as possible because of all the players cut and waived. There's obviously the waiver wire, and we saw last year Lavelle Bailey, he initially made the roster and then was waived to make room for another player. I can't remember who it was. But the Broncos could still pick up players via the waiver wire. So just be cautious with this. This isn't going to be necessarily the 53 heading into week one, right? A lot of stuff can still happen, and teams like to maneuver their rosters to protect their younger guys, to give them less time out on waivers, so teams go and pick out other guys. And then when they're on the waiver, not as many teams are going to be seeking a young guy at that position. And that's at least the goal with kind of managing your roster around this time. But I wanted to go ahead and jump in with the initial 53-man roster for the Denver Broncos. So if you do enjoy, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel down below, as the support is greatly appreciated. And let's get straight in to this video. So starting off with the quarterbacks, the Broncos kept two quarterbacks, right? And obviously in my predictions, I kept three because I like the fact of having that emergency third quarterback, right? The quarterback is the most important position on the roster. And, I just kind of liked having that insurance of someone who already knew the system and has been playing in it for a few months with Sam Ehlinger. Hope we can get him back on the practice squad as that vested veteran. But I do understand cutting a third quarterback to make more depth for your other positions. So obviously going into the year, Bo Nix is obviously QB1. He's going to be the starter. And then Jarrett Stidham is going to be the backup, right? Had a phenomenal preseason. That's why he didn't play in the third week of the preseason, because I wanted to see what they had in Sam Ehlinger. And yeah, ultimately the Broncos roll with two quarterbacks. Then moving on to the running back position, the Broncos kept four running backs around, which is kind of the number I expected, right? Maybe a fifth if you include a fullback, but I don't know if we're going to have a pure fullback this season, considering Michael Burton is going on season-ending injured reserve, so he's not going to play this season. So if there is a fullback role, you know what, we'll get to that later down the road. But J.K. Dobbins I have here, not necessarily the RB1. He could be, but I think it's a 1A, 1B type of situation with him and RJ Harvey. As I mentioned it in my roster prediction video, I think RJ Harvey and Dobbins are going to get a majority of the carries, and I think they're going to split a majority of the carries, and then you're going to sprinkle in guys like Jaleel McLaughlin, who's a smaller scat back, who really earned his way onto the roster through the final few preseason games. Didn't think he was going to make it. I thought, honestly, it was going to be him and Estime out the door, and I thought we were going to keep Blake Watson and Tyler Bidet. And then after last preseason game in week 3, that's what kind of changed my mind about McLaughlin making the roster and why I put him on my way too early, not my way too early, but my final roster prediction. And so he is just kind of a nice change of pace back, as well as Tyler Bidet, who has been solid for the Broncos, not only in the preseason, but the few seasons he's been with the Broncos for quite some time, after being a 6th-round pick out of Missouri to the Ravens, then the Broncos signing him to their practice squad. He's been with the Broncos ever since then, and he's impressed not only in the regular season, not only in the preseason, but the regular season as well. So we get another guy familiar with this system who showed some flashes and explosiveness this preseason. So I'm happy with this room. Obviously, really wanted Blake Watson on the team, but I'm also very happy with Tyler Bidet, and I hope we can get Blake Watson back on the practice squad. Then moving to the wide receiver position, the Broncos kept 5 wide receivers, and I honestly thought we were going to keep 6 of them, but I guess technically we did keep 6 with Evan Ingram, and we'll talk about Evan Ingram when it gets to the tight end portion. But for now, you have 5 guys, and if we were going to keep 5 guys, I think these are the 5 that make the most sense. Obviously, you have Courtland Sutton with that familiarity with Bo Nix at the X position, as well as you just signed him to a contract extension, so kind of clear that he was going to make the roster. Then you have Marvin Mims, who got a large majority of touches and increased his role in the offense down the stretch of last season, plus is an all-pro returner, so you had to figure he was going to make the roster as well. Then you got Troy Franklin, a second-year player out of Oregon, obviously 4th-round pick. Struggled last year, but has really made some big strides in the preseason, and not only in the games, but throughout training camp as well. He's been very impressive. So he was going to make the roster. And then you have Pat Bryant, the rookie third-round pick out of Illinois. He flashed throughout the preseason, as well as this big body target. I'm interested to see how many snaps he gets in this offense, right? Sean Payton typically doesn't play a whole lot of rookies. But Pat Bryant is one of those guys who, I feel like could get some touches, but it's going to depend on how Sean Payton uses them. I'm going to try and slow down because I'm talking pretty fast right now. But yeah, Pat Bryant as the number 4 receiver. And you got Trent Sherfield, who I thought was mostly going to be a special teams guy, but in the preseason, he really flashed, especially in that 49er game. He looked really, really good. I still think he's going to get a large majority of his touches being a special teamer, right? Being on kickoff, being on punt returns as an extra returner, being a gunner, all that sort of stuff. But I do think he's going to get a little more of offensive touches this season than I expected with his performance in the preseason. So those are the 5 wide receivers the Broncos are keeping around. Now you move on to the tight ends with Evan Ingram being the starter. Now technically he is going to be another receiver out there, right? He's just classified as a tight end, but he's not a put your hand in the dirt type of tight end, right? He's going to be mostly a receiver. That's where you're going to primarily see him when he's out on the field. But then you got, sorry about that. But then you got Adam Troutman, who's going to be your more hand in the dirt tight end. He's going to go out, he's going to block, he's going to go out, run some pass patterns, going to catch the football as well. But he's going to be your pure inline tight end for the Denver Broncos. Then you got Nate Atkins, who I see being in that Andrew Beck type of role. Going to play some tight end, but could get some snaps at fullback with obviously Michael Burton going down on IR. I know we waived another fullback, but I think right now how it stands, I would rather just have Atkins play this fullback tight end hybrid type of player, or I guess role, and then pick up another roster spot for a fullback. But that's just me right now. And then you got Lucas Kroll, who played pretty well in that 3rd preseason game against the New Orleans Saints. I think this one's interesting because there are a couple tough cuts that I thought the Broncos made that were interesting, but Kroll played well enough to get this depth role, and who knows, there's a lot of tight ends out on the free agent market, so could be keeping him now, could move on from him, but Lucas Kroll makes the roster for another year for the Denver Broncos. As for the offensive tackles, we kept 5 offensive tackles, obviously Garrett Bowles starting at left tackle, Mike McGlinchey being the starter at right tackle, having really 2 swing tackles and Alex Palczewski, undrafted free agent out of Illinois a few years back. And then Matt Parrott, a former, I think it was like 4th round pick or something of the Giants, and someone who just comes in. Obviously, he reported as eligible a lot last season. I think the Broncos like him, right? And someone who I would be uncomfortable if he was a starting tackle for us, but someone who I don't mind as a depth swing tackle for the Denver Broncos. And then you keep offensive tackle Frank Crum, who was an undrafted free agent last year, which I don't mind this move. I think I predicted him making the final roster last year and then not this year. Solid player, like the upside that Frank Crum brings to the team. Don't think he's quite there yet, but I think he's developing and I think he's improving every year, every game, obviously every snap. So intriguing one, but I don't mind it because I like the upside that Frank Crum brings, the former Wyoming offensive tackle. Then for the interior, not a whole lot of depth here, I would say. You got Luke Wattenberg, the starting center, and then Ben Powers starting left guard, Quinn Miners starting right guard, and then the only other interior guy that you kept around was Alex Forsythe, who can play center or guard if you need him to, which is fine, but it's interesting. I would have thought maybe keeping one less tackle and then one more interior guy. But maybe the Broncos are planning on moving Frank Crum to the interior or one of the other tackles that they kept, moving them to the interior as another depth player. It'll be interesting to see, but this is how it's shaping up right now, right after the roster cuts have been made. Then we move to the defensive line, where the Broncos kept a whopping 7 players, and I don't really blame them with how deep this position is. Obviously, you got Zach Allen, who is a superstar on that defensive line. Don't need to talk a whole lot about him because every Broncos fan watching this, we know who Zach Allen is. Signed that contract extension. He's going to be in Denver for a long time. Then you got DJ Jones, who also signed an extension this offseason, playing that nose tackle role for the Broncos, mostly going to be a run stopper for us. Then you got John Franklin Myers at the other defensive end position, really solid player as well. I would like to see him get a contract extension, but I don't think really the financials are going to work out when you look at all the other players who do need a contract extension with the Broncos, but still a very solid player on this interior defensive line. Then you got Savion Jones, the third-round rookie, who could play edge, but the Broncos like him as a interior pass rusher, right? Going to be someone in the 3-4 system, not coming off of the edge, but being a pass rusher from the interior. I kind of like that role for Savion Jones, at least me personally. Then you got Malcolm Roach, right? He's going to be a depth defensive tackle, going to be another run defender, a really solid pickup addition last year who went leaps and bounds above what I expected him to be when the Broncos initially signed him. Really solid player and a just really solid depth at this position. And that could be what the Broncos are doing. They know who is going to be a free agent soon, right? John Franklin Myers and Malcolm Roach, the two that comes to mind. So you got Savion Jones to potentially fill a gap next year, but then you got some other young guys that maybe you want to see how they play in a regular season action to see what's going to happen with the defensive line in the future when a couple of contracts expire. Next up, you got Ioma Uwazurike. He's kind of young, right? Former 4th-round pick in the 2022 draft, right? Had the back-to-back picks, went Ioma Uwazurike and Damari Mathis. He finds a roster spot, and he's an interesting player, right? Rookie year, 2022, not going to hold too much of that against him. The following season is suspended for the entire year for gambling, right? So he's an intriguing player, and I want to see what happens with him. I'm curious how many snaps he's going to get, but the Broncos do keep Ioma Uwazurike on the roster, which does tell me that they do like him, right? Couple of years removed from his draft year, so he's not guaranteed a roster spot, being a 4th-round pick, which I would say decently high value, right? 4th-round pick. I know it's a mid-round pick, but 4th-round pick is still pretty valuable. So not necessarily being his draft year, couple years removed. I think the Broncos still like what they see in Ioma Uwazurike. And then they kept Jordan Jackson around on that defensive line, someone who you can slide around on that defensive line and just provide some more depth for the Denver Broncos. Then you move to the edge rushers, where the Broncos kept 5 edge rushers, and if the Broncos were going to keep 5, I don't think it's a shock that it's these 5, right? I predicted 4, but these 5, don't think it's a shock. Nick Bonito, who does need a contract extension, as I've been mentioning a couple times throughout this video. Then you got Jonathan Cooper, the 1A, 1B pass rush tandem. Jonah Ellis, he was a rookie last year who showed a lot of promise and really balled out in the preseason. If I'm being honest with you, I think he's going to make a big impact for the Broncos as this rotational edge rusher. Got Q Robinson, who also flashed a lot in the preseason, right? Someone who had a lot of tools, a lot of traits that you saw at Alabama, just didn't have the production sitting behind Dallas Turner, Will Anderson, and then when it was his time to start, does go down with an injury. So a very toolsy player who really shined in the preseason, and I'm looking forward to what Q Robinson does here in the regular season. And then, of course, you kept Dondrea Tillman, who you signed out of the, what was it? It was the, the UFL, the United Football League? I don't watch the Summer League. So I'm sorry if I got that out or if I got that wrong, but someone who I was intrigued by, I think signed a 3-year contract extension, last offseason, and then the Broncos ended up cutting him, and then they signed him back on a 1-year deal. So he's back, and someone who I really like with a decent amount of upside, and it'll be intriguing to see how they use him. Obviously, with Bonito and Cooper being the 2 main ones, Jonah Ellis is going to get some rotational action. Have to see how much playing time Q Robinson gets. Could be a healthy scratch, and this could be just a redshirt year for him. And then you got Dondrea Tillman, who, it'll be interesting to see how they use him, of course, like I just mentioned. Then for the inside linebackers, the off-ball linebackers, you got Dre Greenlaw, which isn't a surprise to anybody. Alex Singleton, don't think it should be a surprise to anybody. Only downside is both of those players are coming off pretty major injuries. Obviously, Dre Greenlaw 2 years ago, Achilles in the Super Bowl. Alex Singleton, a torn ACL last year. So we'll have to see how they play. But Justin Strnad, former 5th-round pick out of Wake Forest in 2020, back on the roster. Just a veteran presence who, if you need him to come in for a few snaps, right, he knows how to get it done. He's been in this defense for quite some time, right? So he's just a veteran who, if you need to throw him in, you can. And then the intriguing one, and this is the most intriguing player in the entire roster, in my opinion, it's going to be Karene Reed, the undrafted free agent out of Utah. I thought for sure that if a undrafted free agent was going to make the team, it was going to be Courtney Jackson. And I thought this spot was going to go to Lavelle Bailey, but Karene Reed, he balled out. He earned his spot on the line in the linebacking room. Don't know how much play time he's going to get, but I do think Karene Reed, he did show flashes and did show potential in the preseason. I mentioned him as one of my standout players in preseason week 1. Of course, had that interception in the 4th quarter, so I do think Karene Reed is a solid player, and it'll be interesting to see how the Broncos utilize him. Then moving on to the corners, right? PS2, CB1. This does not need any explanation for the Denver Broncos. Then Riley Moss, CB2. Did struggle down the stretch after coming back from his injury, but we saw what the defense looked like when Riley Moss was out. He makes a big difference when he's on the field, right? So PS2, Riley Moss, 2 starting outside corners. And then it's just pick your poison of who's going to start in the slot. I have the rookie Jahdae Barron there, and that doesn't mean I think he's necessarily starting. This is just how I'm presenting the information to you, right? We'll have to see what the Broncos do come week 1 versus the Tennessee Titans. But Barron, he showed a lot of promise in the preseason, right? He showed his nose for the football, his tackling ability, right? He's going to lay out. He's going to hit you. He's not afraid to hit. And he also showed off his coverage ability. I was really impressed by Jahdae Barron in the preseason. Then you have Jaquan McMillan, who struggled down the slot maybe last year, but really played well in the preseason. And I think he probably earned his spot as the starting nickel corner. But with how much dime packages we run, I would not be surprised to see McMillan and Barron both out on the field at the same time. And then you got Chris Abrams-Drain, who played really well. And it's like, you want all of these guys out on the field, right? You want to play them all if you can, and that's just not going to happen. But Chris Abrams-Drain is a very talented football player as well. So it's like, what do you do? How are you going to get all these guys playing time? I'm intrigued to see. Really love the cornerback room. I think this is a really deep room this year for the Broncos. Love every single one of the players the Broncos kept at the cornerback position. Then, I guess not finally, but for the safeties, you got Brandon Jones entering year 2 with the Broncos after a really impressive first season with the orange and blue. And then you got Talanoa Hufanga, which it's going to be his first season in the orange and blue. And, played well in the preseason, right? Obviously didn't get a whole lot of snaps. It's the preseason. We can't take a whole lot of stock into it. But Talanoa Hufanga is entering his first year. And, I like the safety tandem of Hufanga and Jones. Then you got PJ Locke, who started a lot last year. I think he's a very solid depth guy at safety who, if you need him to come in and start a game or two, he can do that. And then he'll just be a rotational guy throughout the year. I think that is the perfect role for PJ Locke. And then you got JL Skinner, and one of my favorite players. I was pulling for him. He makes the roster. One of the best special teamers on the team, right? He's going to fly down the field. He's going to hit. He's going to lay you out. That is his game. He's going to hit you hard. He's going to make the tackle. And he's been a very solid special teamer for the Broncos. He's been one of the few guys on special teams that I've always noticed and has always stuck out to me throughout the season. So to me, JL Skinner, absolutely deserving, and I hope he gets some playing time at safety this season because I want to see what he can do in the regular season. But, maybe that's just me. And then we have Devin Key, which I think is an interesting one, right? He was with the Broncos last year, did get some, I don't know if it was starts, but he did get a lot of playing time last year for the Broncos. So to me, this was interesting. I'm happy for Devin, but there's a couple, I'm just, honestly, I would say I'm mostly shocked that he made it over Sam Franklin, but good for Devin, and he makes the 53-man roster for the Denver Broncos. And then for the specialist, you got kicker Will Lutz, punter Jeremy Crawshaw, and long snapper. Oh my goodness, I can't say it. Long snapper Mitchell Fraboni. I don't think these guys are any shock. Just to touch on Jeremy Crawshaw, I mentioned it in my way too early roster prediction. I still believe in Jeremy Crawshaw. I know why a lot of Broncos fans are upset in calling him a bust. I think it's a little bit premature, right? Just in my opinion, after just the preseason, I feel like the fan base we constantly give up on players too early, right? So I still believe in Jeremy Crawshaw because when you drafted him, right, he could kick the ball far down the field, but it wasn't a lot of hang time. It would get down the field, and then you didn't give any time for your coverage team to get down there, so the return would start off like you would get a decent amount of return with how much ground the coverage team had to recover. But now the Broncos are trying to elevate the hang time. They're trying to get him to have a higher hang time with the football, get it down the field. Needs to work on the distance now, but they're working on the hang time with Jeremy Crawshaw. I still believe in Jeremy Crawshaw. Maybe that's just me, but I had to throw that in there for now. But yes, this is the 53-man roster for the Denver Broncos. What are your thoughts on the initial 53-man roster? What would you have done differently than the Broncos? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel down below, as the support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Parker, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.